everyone, this is Ashton from Claire's Cuties, and I wanted to give you a tutorial today showing you how to do your final skin texture layer. And what we're going to use is thick medium and matte varnish, and I also will tint the coloring just a tiny bit with some red and yellow coloring. I use a little sponge, a stamping sponge for the skin texture, and I will also use a little makeup brush for getting into the tighter spots and the creases. And what I will do is use half thick medium and half matte varnish, and you don't need a ton, just depending on obviously how big your baby is, but typically I'll use about that amount. And then I will grab a different brush for my thick medium. And again, I use typically about half and half, thick medium, half matte varnish. Now, your final color will come out. It's not going to be shiny, but it's not going to be ultra matte either. It's going to be more of like a kind of in between, like a satin type varnish. So what I typically do before this layer is I will do a super thin layer of just your matte varnish mixed with your thinning medium, paint thinner, odorless paint thinner. And then I will paint over each piece with my matte varnish first and bake 3 times. Each time you bake, you want to let your vinyl cool down in between the layers. So this last texture layer is also a good way, like if you're finished with your baby and you're really happy with how everything came out, but you can kind of tell there's just a tint you know, that you don't like. Let's say it's a little bit too red, a little too yellow, or a little bit too blue. You can use this final layer to color correct as well. And so that's kind of what I'm going to do here. I have just added a little bit of yellow to counteract the color. She's a little bit cool, a little blue for me, and so I want to warm her up. Okay, so here she is, and I've already done all the fine details. I just need to do that final texture layer. And I will, with my little sponge, take my color and really pounce it in to the sponge. And you kind of create this little bit of texture here at the bottom. See if you can see that. And so that's the texture that you're going for. You don't want just a ton of varnish on, you want a very light layer. And the harder you pounce, the less your texture will be. So if you want your texture to be really heavy, then I don't recommend pouncing it in too much. Just a very light dab will give you a very heavy texture. And then if you want a lighter texture, you can go through and pounce it harder. And so what I typically do is I do the lighter texture, pounce it in really well along the hairline, just because you don't want that texture to be too thick around your hairline, because it will kind of show some white spots whenever you're rooting. So I'll go through and pick up some more color here. Okay, and then I'm gonna do a heavier texture on the bottom half of the face, so I'm just pouncing very lightly and not pushing it into the vinyl too hard. You'll be able to see this texture really well. So if you see that there's like an area that you missed, it's really easy to see that and go back over and correct it. Now this layer does pick up some lint and dust. It will stay in on your skin, on your doll's skin. So you want to make sure and have something ready, like a toothpick, to pick out any little hairs or dust particles that fall in this layer, because it will get baked in. For on the nose, I typically will do like a layer here and pounce it in really well, just to make sure I get it covered on all the spots under the nose. And then once I get everything in the creases, I'll go back in and just on the nose, I'll dab kind of a thicker amount and very lightly just pounce on the nose here. And that's going to give you the impression of those milk bumps. Even though you're not actually coloring them in, it will still look like you have milk bumps on there. And then you want to take a smaller brush and get in all of your creases. And I typically just pounce it up and down to create a little bit of texture in the areas where your larger sponge won't reach. Once you're happy with this layer, I recommend that you bake it again 3 times, cooling in between each time. And what you can do to make sure that it has fully cured is you can, in a less noticeable spot like the back of the neck, just take your fingernail and scratch it. If it shows up white, that means that it's not set, and you want to put it back in the oven again until you can no longer scratch your varnish off. This is also the time that I add my gloss layers, and I will avoid this entire area. There's no need to put texture here, just because you're going to be rooting it and you won't see the texture anyways, and then it'll also cause little white spots to show up whenever you root it. Okay, she's ready for baking. We're all done with our texture layer.